Hi, everyone. I'm pleased to come before you today as the president of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. Welcome to the 110th meeting of the association, the first ever virtual meeting. I want to take a moment and extend my sincere appreciation to all of our sponsors, which include the Archery Trade Association, Aspira, Bass Pro Shops, Boone and Crockett Club, Brandt, Ducks Unlimited, Bureau of Land Management, Kelkamy, NOAA, Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, Sovereign Sportsman Solution, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USDA Avis Wildlife Services, USDA NRCS, and Visual Labs. Thanks again to our sponsors. I also want to acknowledge a terrible loss our community suffered recently. We all work in this endeavor because of our commitment to conservation and caring about the next generation and those common values that tie us together as a close community. On August 8th, our Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation lost 3 of its own. While conducting aerial surveys for desert bighorn sheep in West Texas, their helicopter crashed, taking the lives of Dewey Stockbridge, Fish and Wildlife Technician Brandon White, and State Wildlife Veterinarian Dr. Bob. Please join me in a moment of silence on those sacrifices. Thank you all for that. 2020 has been a challenging year. At our respective state, provincial, and territorial fish and wildlife agencies, we've all made unprecedented changes in a time of historic uncertainty. I don't think any of us could have imagined what this year would bring. This has been a year dominated by words like COVID, pandemic, coronavirus. But there are other more dominant words, more important words, like resilience, compassion, innovation, leadership. We took a deep collective breath and opened our arms to embrace this chaos. Uncertainty has become a way of life. Adaptive management has become the norm. We were resilient. Turning on a dime, we implemented new technologies that enable our employees to work from home. We found a way to hold meetings, engage the public, communicate in ways we have never done before. With virtual meetings, geographic boundaries dissolved, and we're able to increase communication with all of our partners, and especially with our fellow Canadian directors. Instead of being backed into a corner, we took our work to the next level. We were innovative. In the middle of office disruption and increased demand on our employees stepped up to serve each other and our customers. Every single agency raised the bar in determination, flexibility, and professionalism, with the heart of a lion, the skin of a rhino, and the soul of an angel. And here we are, months later, getting our feet underneath us and keeping the outdoors open at this critical time. Record numbers of people have sought solace and connection to nature in our parks and wildlife management areas, but there's more. You see, before COVID-19 came storming into our lives, each of our organizations knew that change was on the horizon. The relevancy roadmap was adopted a year ago in September 2019. That resolution outlined the ideas that healthy fish, wildlife, and our habitats are essential to the quality of our lives, all of our lives. That our world is becoming more urbanized, meaning people are spending less time outdoors. The way people value the outdoors is changing. We are finding new and consuming information in new and different ways. We know that in order to keep relevant, we were going to have to change so we could engage and serve broader audiences. And we begin to think about designing the future. COVID-19 took hold of our lives. Practically overnight, we changed how we did business. Leaping forward in technology, determined to keep our missions moving, we steadied ourselves, only to receive another blow. At the end of May, our attentions turned from the virus threatening our lives to a different kind of threat, one that attacked our integrity and our humanity. Racial issues demanded our attention. Lives were lost, and communities were destroyed. Though different, these monumental issues of global pandemic and racial tensions impacted each of us and our agencies uniquely and in a myriad of ways. While our work to conserve outdoor resources seems straightforward, I will ask you to remember that this mission enhances everyone's quality of life. Residents, non-residents, city folks, country folks, every color, age, ethnicity, opinion, and persuasion in between. The more inclusive and diverse we can be as caretakers, the better we can serve the public for whom we are entrusted to manage our outdoor resources. A few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of hearing Malcolm Chapman speak. He addressed my leadership team at South Dakota Game Fish and Parks. Chap, as he's known, has lived in Rapid City, South Dakota for a number of years. His wife is a graduate of South Dakota School of Mines there, and he served on multiple terms on the city council. What I'm saying, he is thoroughly entrenched in this community. He has lived in a stone's throw from Custer State Park, which is South Dakota's crown jewel. He's never been there before COVID-19. The chap happens to be black. I was shocked to learn he'd never been to the park, but we didn't have time to discuss the reasons why before he began his talk with my team. He shared some great wisdom with us that day, some which I could share with you now. The 5 powers of leadership, according to Chap, include the power of imagination, the power of voice, the power of commitment, the power of change and transition, and the power of teamwork. As I reflect on this, I realize that in many ways we've all been leaders in our own the last few months. We've all had to be imaginative in the face of change. We've remained committed and worked as a team. It's important to look back and remember how we navigated these changes to build the leading of the future. Through all this, it's also imperative to keep the power of voice at the forefront. We must respect each voice at the table. As Chap would say, there's no one listening right now who is as smart as all of us. When we acknowledge where voices come from and respect that space, we can bring our own unique best to the work we are doing now. There's no one at the table who is smart as all of us at the table. On a note of respect, I want to share one last lesson that Chap gave me and my team. Chap was a Marine officer, and we used to raise eyebrows when he first used a Dr. Seuss book that told about sneetches and to teach his company about equality and humanity. Some of the sneetches were star-belly sneetches with really small stars in their bellies. Others were plain belly sneetches. But because they had stars, all the star-belly sneetches would brag, "We're the best kind of sneetches on the beaches." With their snoots in the air, they'd sniff and they'd snort. Will have nothing to do with the plain belly sort. Until one day, a shady fellow came to the beaches and said he could fix their problems. And he put the sneetches through the machine to put stars on the bellies of the plain belly sneetches. As you can imagine, the star belly sneetches didn't like this at all. Sneetches kept running through the machines, having stars added and removed at a frantic pace until finally no one knew who was who. The sneetches really got quite smart in that day. They decided sneetches are sneetches, and no kind of sneetch is the best on the beaches. Dr. Seuss wrote Sneetches in 1961 to teach children about discrimination. It is important to remember the historical context where the civil rights movement was in this country in 1961. As agencies who preserve and protect the quality of life, we all enjoy by fighting for clean water, fresh air, healthy fish and wildlife, as well as sustainable habitats and beautiful parks. We must also fight for the people who enjoy those resources as well. My hope is after the conference concludes, you'll all be leaving feeling empowered, inspired, and ready to lead positive changes in your lives at work and at home. I challenge you to do something better than what you did yesterday and focus on caring for others around you with compassion, giving them the strength through and lead change around them. Encourage all to have an unbridled sense of hope and a belief tomorrow will be better than today. As you continue to face difficult challenges head on, remember to make adversity your ally. Greatness is born during tough times and unexpected circumstances. The future is ours to embrace and to shape for the good of all of us. Remember how important what we do is for continuing the mental and physical health of our country. Let us bring all the voices to the table. Through respect, inclusion, and fostering diversity, we will build something we never imagined. Thank you all and enjoy the conference. Have a good day.
Hello from Missouri. Missouri. I'm Sarah Parker Pauley, Director of the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I'm so excited to be with you today and kick off our plenary session on conservation in the time of coronavirus, social pandemics, cultural pandemics. What a timely discussion as we all face the challenges together as a conservation community. You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about the words of Kate Bowler, who wrote a book called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Told Myself. Isn't that a great title? She says this: I can reconcile the way that the world is jolted by events that are wonderful and terrible, the gorgeous and the tragic, except I'm beginning to believe that these opposites do not cancel one another out. I think the same thoughts again and again. Life is so beautiful. Life is so hard. To say we are in a hard season is an understatement. COVID has rocked our whole worlds. Then add civil unrest, natural disasters, political contentiousness, and financial insecurity, also rocking our worlds, and all at the same time. It's hard to catch our breath. And yet, in this season of more stress and worry and heartache, people are flocking in record numbers to outdoor places that heal. Kids are riding bikes again on greenways. Families are fishing together in streams and lakes. People are discovering new trails and green spaces. They're camping at the local conservation areas or state parks versus traveling thousands of miles away to a resort. They are personally discovering, many for the first time, what we in the conservation family already know. Nature is healing. Nature's amazing. Nature transforms. While we know all the great quotes and words about nature, come to the woods, for here is rest, said John Muir, or a walk in nature walks a soul back to home, said Mary Davis. Or how about the greener the setting, the more the relief, said Richard Louv. And of course, nature itself is the best physician, said Hippocrates. It's not just words anymore. People are experiencing this for themselves. And in that personal experience, they see how nature can connect and heal, and they're coming back for more. We've seen record outdoor recreation numbers this season on a statewide level and a national level, including park visitors, new anglers, and spring hunters. So toilet paper is not the only hot commodity during COVID. At many sporting goods stores, bikes and camping gear supplies, they're sold out too. While we are in a hard season, it is also a unique season of more people understanding the healing benefits of nature. It's certainly a bright and beautiful spot amid some very dark circumstances right now. So yes, we are in a season of great change. I firmly believe the conservation work we do across this country plays an important role in these changes, to heal, to connect, to empower, to be more inclusive and diverse, to broaden our conservation family. People need nature for healing, but nature also desperately needs people to care about it and to conserve it. So we are woven together, and I think we're already starting to think bigger. This change will not be easy. None of the changes we faced so far, even in this recent COVID season, have been. While it can be overwhelming and at times easier just to pull the blanket up over our heads and hide until we can catch our breath, I like better the approach of Elizabeth Lesser, who's the co-founder of the Omega Institute. She says this: when sudden, scary, unwieldy change starts blowing down the doors, you can face it. Hell, you can conquer it. You can grieve what's ended, and then, however impossible it may seem, embrace what has been set in motion. You can choose to see change as a catalyst lighting the fuse that propels you into a place that's entirely, stunningly new. We are definitely in motion. We can grieve what's ended or changed. I've done that some myself. But then we have to embrace this catalyst for new ideas, new direction, and new connections. This is what our conference is all about. Hearing those new ideas, figuring out the bright spots, and then lighting a fuse that propels us forward. We're fortunate to have a great conference lineup, starting with our plenary speakers, that will make us dig deeper, problem solve, think of new ideas, inspire and motivate, and hopefully let us think beyond today to the hard things and the beautiful things ahead, to how we can do that better because we need each other now more than ever. So get ready for a great lineup of plenary speakers, including Mr. Preston Cole, Secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. One of Preston's themes will be about reaching people of color about the importance of conservation and the value of nature-based outdoor recreation to their lives. Preston has focused significant time and attention to connecting urban constituencies with the outdoors. Then we have Ms. Angelou Azillio, founder and CEO, Greening Youth Foundation, Atlanta. Angelou has also published a book entitled Engage, Connect, Protect, Empowering Diverse Youth as Environmental Leaders. She will help us think about recruiting diversity into our workplaces. Her organization has partnered a lot with the federal agency family, and I think her messages will help us make important new connections. Then we have Ms. Jennifer Selakis, Director of Wildlife and Habitat, Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resources, Operations, British Columbia. Jen will explore in part the opportunities on the horizon for conservation delivery and engagement with diverse publics, including First Nations. I think she'll challenge us to think in terms of measured, proactive concepts or ideas for the future, with a distinctive Canadian flair, which we don't always have a chance to hear. Finally, Ms. Elizabeth Marima, Executive Director, Convention on Biological Diversity, Montreal, Quebec. Elizabeth is distinctly poised to help us remember the global implications of all that we do as a conservation community. And now, without further ado, we turn it over to our very first speaker. Preston Cole. Secretary Cole had been a member of the Wisconsin Natural Resources Board since 2007, first appointed by Governor Jim Doyle and then reappointed for another 6-year term by Governor Scott Walker in 2013. He served as Natural Resources Board Chair from 2013 through 14. Previously, Secretary Cole worked in a government setting as a park superintendent for the city of St. Louis and a resource forester for the Missouri Department of Conservation. He also served as operations chief for the Milwaukee Department of Public Works and earlier the city forester. Most recently, Secretary Cole was the commissioner of the Milwaukee Department of Neighborhood Services. Secretary Cole supports traditional conservation activities and environmental protection, as well as connecting non-traditional audiences with opportunities to get outdoors.
Hi, my name is Preston Cole, and I'm Secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And the reason I'm wearing my mask is just as a visual reminder for all of us that our safety is important. And the way to remain safe is to wear your mask, wash your hands often. Let's manage our social distancing and keeping 6 feet from one another. Let's stay out of harm's way when gatherings of large quantities of people are all in the same space, specifically indoors. And with that, my name is Preston Cole. As I said before, I'm your secretary to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. It's been a tough 3 or 4 months. From a global pandemic to civil unrest, this year has been like no other. When COVID-19 hit Wisconsin in mid-March, people were generally in 2 places, their homes or outdoors. People needed a place or a space. With 49 state parks, 15 state forests, 44 state trails, 84,000 miles of rivers and streams, and roughly 15,000 lakes, we were able to provide just that space. Outdoor recreation is essential to our economy, our quality of life, our personal well-being, and our happiness. Although every state is impacted by COVID-19, outdoor recreation is seeing substantial growth and stability, both at the local and national level. During the pandemic here in Wisconsin, we had more than 6.4 million park visitors. We also saw double-digit increases for fishing and turkey hunting licenses. When people enjoy the outdoors, not only are they investing in equipment from hiking boots to kayaks, They're also investing in our local communities. Outdoor recreation is a significant industry driving Wisconsin's economy. Outdoor recreation adds approximately $7.8 billion to our state's GDP and supports approximately 93,000 jobs. Those are not small numbers. We at the DNR are charged with protecting the state's amazing natural resources. It's a job that I take very seriously. I also take creating a diverse and inclusive workforce very seriously, just as I take making sure our outdoor spaces are accessible and inclusive for all. As we navigate the new normal, now more than ever, we must come together as a society. This is the time for us to lean in. We can no longer just talk about diversity and inclusion. We have to put our words into action. We have an opportunity to get off the sidelines and get to work. Change isn't always easy, but oftentimes it's necessary. Just like learning to walk, charting a new way of doing things may take time, but you can start small. And I'll give you an example. Shortly after I started with the DNR, we decided to celebrate the start of the 2019 fishing season by hosting at a park in the heart of Milwaukee. There, we partnered with the Inner City Sportsman Club, which was founded to inspire kids to fish. Young folks and old, the mayor of Milwaukee, and even the lieutenant governor joined us. We provided the poles, a few lessons, then we had a fish fry. Never underestimate the value of breaking bread with your partners, strengthening those relationships. You never know who's touched by providing that positive and welcoming event. But we also do culturally significant work with our tribal partners.
The Menominee word for sturgeon is namau. It essentially means the big fish. And namau Oskawamit means the place where they return to. Our creation story talks about what the Creator gave us on that first day on this earth, and He gave us sustenance, and some of that sustenance was lake sturgeon.
There were 2 dams built in the late 1800s that prevented these prehistoric fish from migrating upstream to the Menominee reservations for well over 100 years, over a century. We are working to restore lake sturgeon in the Wolf River on their reservation.
We should remember the importance of sturgeon to the Menominee tribe. It's all of our responsibility to pay homage to these long-held traditions from our tribal relatives, our tribal brothers and sisters around the state of Wisconsin.
The tribe's real goal is to get these fish back what they were to historic levels. This effort's a good one. This effort is bringing fish home.
Another area we're focusing our efforts is climate change. Climate change is a defining issue of our time. From shifting weather patterns, increased temperatures, and heavier snowfalls, the impacts of climate change directly affect Wisconsin. At the heart of our mission is bringing together diverse perspectives and relying on science to inform our decision-making. Additionally, the department's mission also requires us to ensure the right of all people to use and enjoy Wisconsin's natural resources. We must also recognize that people of color and low-income communities are often the hardest hit by the effects of climate change, and we must remedy that injustice. But the work just doesn't stop there. We're also working towards diversifying our staff, including our warden force. We want our workforce to reflect people in which we serve.
I came from Thailand. I was born in a refugee camp. And I've been a Wisconsin conservation warden since 2016. The importance of being a law enforcement officer as a minority is you can bridge that gap between 2 communities. My best day as a warden would be knowing that I made a difference. We're at a turning point in our history right now where we can make a difference in the future. Nothing lasts forever if you don't take care of it. And that's why I became a Wisconsin conservation warden.
When we hire individuals from diverse backgrounds into our ranks at the DNR, we're hiring individuals that are not only committed to our mission and public service, we're hiring people that culturally are responsive to a diverse population. Think about your own organization. How many people of color are in your leadership? This isn't as simple as hiring a few diverse game wardens. There are hundreds of jobs where people of color are needed. Like me, your organizations need fish and wildlife biologists, as well as accountants, attorneys, coders, and marketers. It's easy to say we have a diverse program. We're diverse. Problem solved, right? Wrong. There is so much that needs to go into welcoming people of color into the world of natural resources, into our world of natural resources. And the answer is simple. We need to normalize being Black and brown in the outdoors. The action is more complex. It starts with us. See, if electricians and realtors and programmers can rewrite racially coded language out of their profession, then we in natural resources should be culturally responsive to our minority communities and rethink how we communicate. When people set foot in our parks, so often the stories that have been illustrated are those of historically white voices. Black people had a hand in building the history of our communities. So why aren't we telling those stories? I think of Wisconsinites like Pierre Bunga, a Black man born into slavery, a fur trader that was instrumental in developing the trade in northern Wisconsin in the 1800s. Black free Wisconsinites have been here for hundreds of years, yet historically, we have failed to tell their stories. Historical storytelling about people of color that impacted our natural resources is part of the simple act of making our public lands that much more welcoming. The more we can make an effort to be welcoming, the more our public lands will be utilized by people of color. Going forward, we will tell these historical stories. Additionally, we will showcase what we want to see in our future and what our future looks like. What motivates people to learn more and try more is seeing someone that looks like them doing that work. In a field that is predominantly white, having young people of color see faces like their very own reflected back to them can be a game changer. Our fall quarterly magazine and podcast will be telling a story of Corey Waltering, a Black runner from Illinois who tackled our very own Ice Age Trail with lightning speed. Or the work of James Edward Mills, a Black writer and outdoorsman from Madison, Wisconsin, who also calls for inclusivity in our outdoor spaces. When we elevate these voices, we're showing people of color that they are part of the fabric of this society and not separate from it. When we seek to tell stories of all backgrounds to build better relationships in the great outdoors in our minority community, it becomes the norm, not the exception. Where we can tell Black stories, we should. And where we can give Black voices the opportunity to be heard, we should make that a priority. Our voices are valuable. In the last few months, have brought an understanding of this very fact to a national and international stage. Lending our platform to voices from people of color is not just important to our agency, it should be part of the fabric of our culture and key to preserving and maintaining our natural resources. As leaders, you realize it's time to double down on building these important relationships. The vast majority of our work on our lands are funded by tax dollars from people of color. They are the owners in the work that we do. Take the steps towards inclusion. Open hearts and open minds are the humblest approach towards building better relationships with our brothers and sisters. Take action to seek new partnerships that can share in the work. Talk to the tourism agencies, talk to your urban communities, talk to your social service agencies. Again, make the relationship investment in our urban and rural communities where people of color live, work, and play. Because the collective impact of all your efforts is where you will gain the momentum. When asking the question, what do people of color want from us or from the outdoors? It's first important to realize that people of color are not a monolithic group. There are many answers. Some seek a sense of well-being and fitness. Some seek a connection to nature. And some folks just want to be on the land that they're paying for through their tax dollars. This is why we need to build a multifaceted approach. And how do we make the outdoors more inviting to people of color? As I said earlier, showcase and tell their history. Prioritize their voices in your workforce and your external communication. Work with organizations that connect you to those priorities. The paradigms for the future of conservation may emerge. What are they? Outreach efforts need not to be prescriptive or reactionary to individual issues, but rather a multifaceted approach to reverse years of benign neglect where there has been lack of understanding and cooperation. I cannot stress enough. Now is a time to look inward at your own organizations and ask whether people of color are at the table, making big decisions, guiding our efforts. We have the ability to grow a diverse workforce by thinking beyond the public face of our organizations and seeking out talented individuals for every division of our agencies. Providing relevant job opportunities during a crisis like this can only serve to strengthen organizations, your organizations, with highly qualified and a diverse workforce. Why are communities of color underrepresented in fish and wildlife professions? And how do we address that? Again, this is a change that has to happen from the top down. When we bring people of color into the conversation of hiring early and often, it gives us new perspectives. Has your organization considered recruiting from historical Black colleges? These are land-grant universities based in agriculture and natural resources put in play after the Civil War. Have you been talking to your urban leagues and your workforce development boards? So many of these organizations can help recruit people of color into skilled and leadership roles. In closing, we must be focused on inclusion. There is no better time than the present. Not tomorrow, not the next day, but now. These past few months have presented an opportunity for our new future. And with that, I encourage us to be safe and remember we are stronger together. And please wear your mask. Thank you.
Angelou Azillio. Angelou Azillio is founder and CEO of the Greening Youth Foundation. A leading social entrepreneur, she was a 2016 Ashoka Fellow, is a member of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights Women in Solidarity Society, and is on the boards of the Atlanta Audubon Society and the South Fork Conservancy. She is also an advisory board member for the Arabia Mountain National Heritage Area and Outdoor Afro. And she's on the steering committee for the new Children's Wellbeing Initiative, a network of 22 changemakers working together to promote children's well-being across the country.
Thank you, Ron Reagan and David Buggs and the community for the Association for Fish and Wildlife Agencies. My name is Angelou Azillio. I am the CEO and founder of Greening Youth Foundation, as well as an author of the book Engage, Connect, Protect, Empowering Diverse Young Adults as Environmental Leaders. Just want to tell you a little bit. One, I just would really thank, I'm appreciative of this opportunity to speak to you all today. I wish we were there. I was there with you in person, but nonetheless, I am very pleased to deliver this message to you. Just wanted to share a little bit about who I am. So if I were there with you in person, I'd be asking who's from New Jersey, because I always like to identify my Jersey folks. So I'm from Jersey City, New Jersey. The connection, people always ask me, what is the connection to the environment or nature? Like, how did I get here? And I would really say it's it's my grandmother, my late grandmother, Aline Dawson. You know, we grew up in Jersey City in a brownstone. So basically, what she would do with this little 4x6 garden in front of our brownstone was amazing. You know, we had all sorts of beautiful flowers growing there in the back. She grew vegetables, and I was her deputy. Everything she needed me to do, I was there to do for her. There was these amazing sunflowers in which she taught me how to take the seeds out, and we would bake them. I mean, they never really taste that great, but I love the process nonetheless. She had these 4 o'clock plants that literally bloomed at 4 o'clock every day. So nature was really, it just blew my mind. But then it was furthered by my parents. They actually purchased 54 acres in upstate New York. So my siblings and I have 2 older siblings. We would go every summer with my parents to upstate New York in Ezeilo, New York, where there were this like forested land and this little humble house. But that's really where I think that connection, the deep connection to the outdoors would happen, because we would go on these epic hikes, you know, and we would pick berries that would go into the food that we would eat. You know, I formed these relationships with all the critters and snakes and things that lived around the house. It was incredible. You know, I would really have these moments where, you know, I think even as a young child, I was, you know, meditating and just quiet. It was okay. Like when I was in Jersey City, it was just always so much going on. But when I would go there, there was so much peace. And I really appreciated that. And it was obvious that I had like this connection and affinity towards the environment and nature and outdoors. However, I didn't know at the time that there were even careers that I could pursue. I went off to Spelman College at HBCU in Atlanta, Georgia. Shout out to all the HBCU folks out there. And this college was really, really special to me, even though I wasn't excited to be going, because I thought I wanted to be like this superstar. I wanted to be in film. But it was really, really special. The sisterhood, that's an all-female Black college, as I stated. But the sisterhood that I formed there was incredible. The sense of community was so incredible. But the thing that I remember the most and always will carry with me is our president, Dr. Dressetta B. Cole, saying to us that if you see something, don't just sit on the sidelines. Be the change that you want to see in the world. So make a choice to change the world. And that's actually, you know, it stuck with me. I went on to law school because of that, because I really thought that that was how I was going to effectuate change. You know, but I think at this point, I became a lawyer, a corporate lawyer, but this is where I want to really transition to the theme of my talk today, which is outdoor recreation and careers hidden in plain sight for certain youth. What does that mean exactly? Basically, it's the reason why I became a lawyer. Later on, you know, I inquired like to my parents, why didn't you guys push me or at least encourage me to explore careers in the outdoors or conservation? And their response was, we had no idea. You know, we didn't necessarily see that as a field that was welcoming to people that look like us or look like you. So that certainly wasn't going to be something that we encouraged our little girl to do. So of course, you know, what most like middle-class Black families do is either doctor, lawyer, engineer, architect. So I did the legal route, you know, but there's so many problems to that. And that's in large part why I founded the foundation, Green and Youth Foundation, is because the environmental sector is it's like a secret or something, you know, that people of color weren't even necessarily, especially back then, aware of the careers that existed in this field. You know, and I would say that's in large part because of this access equity issue is what I call it. You know, basically there's like 100 million Americans that don't have access to quality parks, to the outdoors, to nature. And we actually saw that recently with this COVID, with this pandemic, that everyone was kind of saying, this is, I'll go out in my backyard, I'll go to a park. And we really saw how, that the fact that people of color didn't necessarily have those connections. They weren't able to be outdoors and do their jobs in the outdoors. So this is when I started really focusing on, back then, the intersection of the environmental field and the oppression of people of color, particularly, opportunities that don't exist for youth. So, when I'm talking about this issue, and as we started to really formulate Greener Youth Foundation, I realized intersectionality is so important when you're talking about Black and Indigenous people of color in the environmental sector. There's just no way that you can talk about connecting people of color to the outdoors without talking about the hundreds of years of oppression and systemic racism that exists. Literally every single system that's out there, from housing to banking to education, all these fields are impacted by racism. So there's no way that you can talk about, careers or, access to healthy foods. All of that has to be through the lens of systemic oppression. And that actually brings me to what Dr. Dressetta Taylor, she's a sociologist, she calls it the eternal stereotype. And that is that people of color are not interested in the environment. Now, I grew up in a very Afrocentric family, so I was aware of, the connections that Africans, that Native Americans, that Latinos have to Asian Americans have to the land. So when I kept, hearing this statement, everywhere I would go, I knew that had to be false. That it was ridiculous. There's an intrinsic connection between people of color and land. So that leads me to, well, what is perpetuating this stereotype? And one of the things that I know that as a young adult, it was marketing. I love, my favorite saying by Sally Ride, the astronaut, female astronaut, is you have to see it to be it. So when we're looking at all of these different careers and, catalogs, everything, we usually see white people in these ads, in the marketing. We don't see people of color. And that directly affects you when you're a person of color and you're trying to figure out, is that something for me? So right away, it triggers, that must be a white thing. That's white space. Parks are for white people. And that obviously is an issue. So in addition to marketing, there's other things that affect how homogeneous the environmental field is. Another thing is unconscious bias. I'd like to read the actual definition of unconscious bias, because I don't think that everyone really understands how it impacts decisions and things that you do. Unconscious biases are learned stereotypes that are automatic, unintentional, deeply ingrained, and able to influence behavior. So unconscious bias, implicit bias, these are things that we're not, as the definition states, we're not even aware of. So this is what forms that sort of prototype of who should be working or even recreating in the outdoors. And that perhaps is perpetuated by the marketing, as I stated. And one of the things that I wanted to make this personal so that people really understand how these biases and the microaggressions, if you will, affect people of color in the outdoors. Just recently, my two sons, who are 18 and 21, went out to go tubing at the Chattahoochee River, at the Chattahoochee National Park here in Georgia. And obviously they've grown up in a household where, we've taken them on camping, on outdoor spaces all their lives. They've learned about the importance of being stewards and so forth, and also recreating in the outdoors. We've gotten them to quite a few places. They're certainly privileged. So when they went tubing, though, they brought a friend along. That one thing that they came back and said was, this is recent, that despite the fact that so many people are trying to get outdoors and do things outdoors, there was just nobody other than them of color doing this tubing. And they were really, they had an incredible time, but they said, although it's strange that so few people of color were there doing this activity, they were very conscious of the looks they were getting. It was like all these microaggressions, with the staff that worked there, and their friend, and they pushed on because they're like been taught that this is their space just as well as it is anybody else's. So that didn't deter them, but and when giving me the feedback, they were like, why are we still getting looks in 2020? It's ridiculous. And that young person, their peer, actually went and had another excursion, invited their friends. So, that's the really interesting thing about this, is that once these young adults of color, Black, brown, whatever it is, are exposed to the outdoor recreation and careers, it's magic. So now I get to the exciting part of my presentation, is Greenie Youth Foundation. Because what I believe is Greenie Youth Foundation is forming that cultural bridge. Our mission at Greenie Youth Foundation is engaging underrepresented youth and young adults, connecting them to the outdoors in careers and conservation. That's the mission, and that's what we've been doing for 15 years. I'm so proud of the work that Greenie Youth Foundation does and the work that our team does. We have programs that speak exactly to that mission, starting off with our Forever Green program. That's a program for K through 12 where we're providing environmental and wellness literacy to young kids, basically. So we're going into schools, we're going into recreation centers, boys and girls clubs, and planting that seed at a very young age for these young people to understand their connection to nature and to the outdoors, and giving them, encouraging them to stay connected, giving them the jargon and, the experiences, these positive experiences. We have something called the Legacy Campout, where, we bring fourth graders and sometimes high schoolers, 75 to 100 of them together every year. This is a partnership with the Martin Luther King National Historic Park. And basically we camp out in Atlanta, Georgia, right in the open, looking at the skyline, and the whole point is just really trying to bring them this outdoor experience of camping, because 99% of them haven't done it before. And it's always, this is our 10th year that's coming, and Congressman John Lewis joined us last year. It was amazing. We've had to pivot that program and make it digital. So now it's called the Green Box. Our Forever Green Kids program is now the Green Box, where we send them supplies and materials, and we do the lessons online, which has been an amazing adjustment to this pandemic. Then we have our Youth Conservation Corps, and that's where we partner with federal land management agencies to provide paid internship opportunities for young adults. We also work with environmental NGOs as well as outdoor retailers to provide these internship opportunities. So you can only imagine when Ron Reagan reached out to me, I'm like, how are we not working with these state agencies, Fish and Wildlife state agencies? So I'm really hoping that I can connect with each of you, because it's amazing what these young people have been able to do and how they're inspired by being interns, and how that's leading them to these different career trajectories. And the impact has been incredible. Once these young people are exposed and they have these internships, they want to continue in these fields. So to me, it's just incredible. I mean, they're using these direct hiring authorities, and they are getting hired, and they're loving the work that they're doing. They're telling their communities, they're telling their peers, they're telling their friends. Our vision at Greenie Youth Foundation is for this environmental field to reflect the demographics of society. We have a lot of work to do. And this couldn't be done without our partners. So I'm really looking forward to adding all of you as our partners. So I want to be able to give at this point just some insight of what I've seen over the past 15 years of doing this. So as you all know, I have been in this field now for quite some time. I have, worked for the Trust for Public Land doing land conservation. I worked for the Department of Agriculture, doing farmland preservation, and now doing conservation, acquiring land for trails and so forth. So I've been in a lot of these spaces, but all in the environmental field. And one thing that I can say that's so important, the biggest tip that I can share with you is the importance of listening. Listening. When you're wanting to engage with different communities, do not go with this top-down approach. You have to go into these communities and listen. Listen to hear what the pain points are. Listen to hear what the objectives are. And then, when you've built the trust, then you can work on the objectives and strategies together. Another tip would be the importance of partnerships. Partner with organizations that are already reaching the demographic that you want to reach. There's some Green Youth Foundation, Outdoor Afro, Latino Outdoors, Hispanic Access Foundation, Native Outdoors. There's so many organizations that are already out there doing the work and connecting to people of color in these communities where you all might want to reach. But the thing is, they're the experts. Allow them to lead. Allow them to show you what it means to have authentic relationships with communities. And then the other thing is create community through outreach. So if you're wanting to bring in different communities, then do the work. You got to do the outreach. There's sororities, there's fraternities, there's churches, there's all sorts of communities that you can reach out to really broaden your reach. And then I would say the other thing is, as you would expect me to say, but it's so important, is to increase your diversity on your workforce, in your workforce. So not just people who are working at these different agencies, but also board membership on the leadership level. What we want to do is to help you all decrease these blind spots. If you don't have people that are representing the communities that you're trying to reach, then you will have blind spots. I believe it was Gucci, this designer, that it was so obvious that they had no one of color on their design team. So they designed this scarf that basically when you pull it up, it was blackface. Such a faux pas, and it was offensive and all the other things, but there was no one, I'm sure, on their team to tell them that is not right. Let's not do this. Or, I was actually listening to a podcast of somebody who was a Black person that was not comfortable going into this park. And the main reason why, when she was approaching it, she felt anxiety and tension is because it was on Confederate Parkway. So these are things that we have to change if we want to really start being more inclusive and bring others into this field. So I want to highlight the things that I think we need to focus on. It's intentionality. We can't let, this diversity thing, just kind of come and go. We have to be intentional about changing the field of how it looks and who we are welcoming and bringing into this field. And we have to take bold actions. We have to make the change. We have to be courageous and say enough is enough. As we saw with the Black Lives Movement this summer, we have to stand up and say enough is enough. Because white people are benefiting from this racist system without doing one racist act. And so if you're complicit and you do nothing, then you're a part of this system. So let's do things so that we can say enough is enough. And I'm going to encourage us all to be uncomfortable, make decisions and do things that perhaps you're not as comfortable with. And that's when you know that you're making progress towards this change. So I'd like to end with one of my favorite African proverbs, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. This DEI work is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It requires a lot of work. It requires us all to roll up our sleeves and do this work together. And I have no doubt that if we vote first, which is so important, but also if we collectively work on this problem, and it's going to take time. It's been decades, hundreds of years of getting us to where we are. So don't give up when it doesn't happen immediately. We can do this together. Thank you so much. And I look forward to perhaps engaging you all. And please reach out to Greedy Youth Foundation for partnership opportunities. Reach out to Angelou Azillio, to me, for coaching or speaking or any type of engagement in which I can help you to move forward on this journey. Thank you and have a great day.
Jennifer Selakis. Dr. Jennifer Selakis is the Director of Wildlife and Habitat for the province of British Columbia. She feels privileged to enjoy a career devoted to the stewardship of British Columbia's rich biodiversity and is inspired every day by the dedication and passion that people have for wildlife in BC. Jennifer completed her Ph.D. in Natural Resource Management from the University of Northern British Columbia, her Master's in Biology at the University of Regent, and her undergraduate degree in Wildlife Management from McGill. She is a current board member of Wildlife Habitat Canada and participates on various national and international wildlife committees and advisory boards.
Good day. I'd like to share with you some perspectives from Canada with respect to the shifting conservation paradigms and links to the relevancy roadmap. I wish to thank the organizers for asking me to contribute to the plenary session today. I am deeply honored and humbled to provide my personal thoughts and experiences to this session. Indeed, these are extraordinary times. We are at a collision of multiple crises that are straining global systems. It was just the spring of 2019 when the UN report from the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services made stark headlines internationally. Nature's dangerous decline unprecedented. Species extinction rates accelerating. Of course, for decades, really, these alarm bells have been ringing with arguably little change to the fundamental threats of habitat loss, pollution, invasive species, climate change, and the overuse of renewable and non-renewable resources. But what really caught my attention with this report was not the dire warnings of extinction rates, which sadly does feel like old news, but the very direct focus on globalization and the urgent need to disrupt economic systems if our hopes to halt the loss of biodiversity that are necessary to avoid dire implications to humanity are achieved. Geopolitical and economic barriers were described as overwhelming challenges to reversing these worrisome trends. Calls to action were made, as were strategies and guidance for policymakers. Collectively, like the relevancy roadmap, practical steps are laid out that, when sustained and accumulated, can build new norms that over time should lead to transformative change. Alternatively, transformative change can occur when complex systems are impacted by catastrophic disruption. Just like an ecosystem, the parts of the complex systems must organize and adaptations occur as the systems recover to emerge out to the previous or new stable state. Undoubtedly, the COVID-19 pandemic is a catastrophic disruption, We have witnessed massive impacts to life as we know it, and governments and individuals have mobilized to collectively confront these shared challenges. Our future depends on the steps that we can take to respond and recover from this disruption. From a conservation perspective, we know that the changes are needed. The Relevancy Roadmap lays out pragmatic and technically sound approaches to transform fish and wildlife agencies and achieve a new conservation paradigm, a paradigm shared with many Indigenous cultures around the world and promoted by the UN, where conservation of healthy ecosystems is recognized as essential for community well-being and economic prosperity. Not only does the catastrophic disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic provide this moment in time to reorganize complex systems, it also provides us an opportunity to learn from successful approaches to shifting societies through this transformative change in a manner that may expedite the transformative shift that is needed for conservation. In my speech, I will share with you some highlights from lessons that we can learn and translate into actions that may expedite change. My stories are strongly influenced by social justice imperative to reconcile with Indigenous nations in Canada. I will focus my talk more or less against the categories of culture, capacity, and political and legal constraints identified in the Relevancy Roadmap, but not on the technical approaches or techniques, which are sound. Rather, I will highlight values like compassion, patience, empathy, curiosity, and courage that are so often needed to create positive experience and improve outcomes that are lasting. A warning, I will make some sweeping generalizations, and I sincerely hope not to offend anyone. I also am intentionally looking for the silver lining in a very dark time for many people. My heart goes out to you for those that have suffered loss. Switching gears. Before I share my observations, there are a few points about BC and my experience that I think will be helpful to contextualize this talk. First, the pandemic response in BC is led by the Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry. Second, conservation is primarily viewed as a shared responsibility of everyone, and government programs are funded through general revenue. With few exceptions, this has resulted in a shared stewardship model where responsibility to ensure sustainability is distributed across multiple agencies. Third, the rights of Indigenous peoples are affirmed through the federal Constitution. And in 2019, the Declaration Act was passed in BC that affirms the application of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This act will ensure that BC laws are consistent with UNDRIP. So to begin on leadership and trust, I'd like to speak a little bit more about Dr. Henry and her leadership style. BC was the second Canadian province to confirm a case of COVID-19 in late January 2020. On March 16th, with cases just over 100, our public health officer, Dr. Henry, implemented strict physical distancing measures through directives and communicated guidelines to minimize risk. Dr. Henry is incredibly suited to lead during this crisis. She was the operational lead in the response to the SARS outbreak in Toronto, and worked internationally on the program to eradicate polio in Pakistan and the Ebola outbreak in Uganda. Despite that background and how lucky most British Columbians feel to have such a qualified person to lead us during this time, she is most recognized and praised for empathetic and transparent leadership. She ends most of her daily briefings with, "Be kind, be calm, be safe." And this tagline has become so popular, it's on signs. Parents say it to their children. Even a designer shoe company has fashioned a shoe inspired by Dr. Henry, and these words are etched on their soles. In terms of transparency, she has relied heavily on scientific models. Data are shared daily, and assumptions and uncertainties are communicated with the public. She treats each of her decisions as a testable hypothesis that we must learn from so that we can change and adapt as we move through the reopening phase and be prepared for the inevitable second wave of infections. We are now in a phase of reopening that allows 60 to 70% of normal interaction. With daily cases in the 70 to 80 range, she says she is uncomfortable, but contact tracing is working and hospitalizations remain low, which are some of the primary goals. Lastly, Dr. Henry acknowledges that one size will not fit all, but calls out poor behaviors. In the face of all the uncertainty and change, her overall approach has resulted in a very high level of trust and a collective action that so far is proving highly successful, not only with managing the outbreak, but also providing a very strong sense of team. This empathetic, transparent, and decisive approach provides lessons to all leaders faced with disruptive changes. Next, I would like to speak to cooperation. Globally, the unofficial tagline of the pandemic is, "We are all in this together." It is a statement that reflects the social bond we have to one another and captures a sense of local, national, and international community that is needed for hope and optimism. Indeed, the level of global cooperation shows that society is capable of much in the face of tangible, imminent threat to life. Although by no means is the hard work over, there is a broad acceptance that cooperation is required, not only for the response to the pandemic, but also the exit and recovery periods. Global leaders will need to continue to work together, as any country will only be as safe as its neighbor. This requires that nations with the means to help those without means should be compelled to do so, if for no other reason to protect their own safety. Scientists are also collaborating at an unprecedented scale, and huge amounts of data are openly shared. It is anticipated that multiple vaccines will be developed years faster than what normally occurs. At a local level, there is a need for cooperation to recognize that individuals and communities have different vulnerabilities and tolerances to risks. For example, in BC, many rural Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities lack supplies and access to healthcare, and some communities are not welcoming visitors while others are. This is further complicated by the sensitivity in Indigenous communities to the past devastation from virus epidemics. To acknowledge these differences in vulnerability and risk tolerance in BC communities, they are receiving extra health capacity and help to extend information on how to mitigate the risks of virus exposure. Also, all potential travelers are asked to be respectful of community wishes and avoid those communities that have asked for more time to remain isolated. This type of cooperation requires compassionate understanding and individual responsibility. And this, frankly, is proving more challenging. There are frustrations expressed from some travelers, including hunters and anglers, that feel excluded from public lands without sufficient justification. The frustration is exasperated because outdoor activities like hunting and angling are at the same time being encouraged as safe activities that are beneficial for both physical and mental health. Underlying this conflict could actually be a collision of worldviews. The Indigenous communities see the community health dependent on the health of ecosystems, and the pandemic is as equal a threat to ecosystems as development is. As guardians of their traditional land, there is even a higher motivation to protect the lands and all the values that sustain them during this time. From a non-Indigenous perspective, the risk to health and the risk to environment are compartmentalized, and a belief that both are manageable with appropriate precautions. Of course, there is truth to each perspective with the people that hold them, and much more underlying the conflict. Dealing with this issue from a management perspective is challenging because the conflict arises from these belief systems and experiential knowledge and perspectives that aren't fully understood or shared between the two groups. Education to increase the understanding about the potential risks, differences in the beliefs, frequent and open communication with compassionate messages for all interest groups, and the provisions of supports and alternatives has been key to reduce tension. That said, there are some areas in the province where common ground has not been fully achieved, and dialogue is continuing to try and find a better solution. This situation is also a good example of how difficult it can be to implement proactive or precautionary actions to mitigate environmental risks. At least with the pandemic, most everyone has been impacted to some extent and can understand why avoiding any level of transmission is a positive action. The impacts of biodiversity loss and climate change can be much less tangible, so is increasing the challenge of individual and societal behaviors. When there is a difference in a perception and tolerance to a risk, which blurs the line between right and wrong, and a lack of tangible outcomes, there is an increased role for government to implement clear decisions and make preparations to deal with the implications of those decisions. This approach makes uncertain outcomes certain and often creates the environment for innovations, kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid and moving on with things rather than peeling it back slowly. Given these complexities, there needs to be a general expectation that governments make clear and timely decisions, even in the face of uncertain information. And I would like to focus more directly on the role of governments and policymakers that support the decision makers. Courage is often needed to make decisions, given implications could otherwise be deferred to future decision makers. Courage can be built with rigorous analysis of information and excellent communication, or perhaps more appropriately, translation of the analyses into common language that the decision maker and constituents impacted by the decision can easily understand. Special consideration is needed to ensure the implications are not disproportionately borne by different parts of the society or the environment. As we speak, preparations are being made for the time when we emerge from the pandemic and establish a new normal. Rigorous analysis, excellent communication needs to be happening now so we can enable courageous decision-making that can progress us into a new conservation paradigm that will have lasting social and economic benefits. Again, if I take a moment to reflect on Indigenous worldviews, there is a tremendous opportunity to implement more sustainable policies that can improve social and cultural injustices highlighted through the pandemic crisis. If we can convey to non-Indigenous societies and lawmakers that there is not a disconnect between humans and ecosystems, that the health of the environment is foundational to the health of our communities and economies, and that we have an accountability to future generations that will be needed to progress for humanity. In that regard, fish and wildlife agencies have an opportunity to influence post-pandemic recovery plans by designing ways to incorporate outcomes that lead to enduring protection, enhancement, or restoration of ecosystems. By assessing and identifying priorities for the creation or restoration of natural infrastructures, nature-based solutions, and green space in urban areas, recovery funding to stimulate the economy may be leveraged. Indeed, we have a responsibility to ensure the decisions we make today improve the conditions for future generations and provide equal options to those generations that ours enjoy. To summarize, the pandemic will not last forever. It is a point in time, and timing can be everything. The Relevancy Roadmap inherently recognizes the need for both ecologically and socially responsible wildlife and ecosystem conservation. It provides a practical guide to overcome barriers to broader relevance, public engagement, and support. So the gift that the pandemic gives to us is an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to reconcile social justice and economic futures that can be founded on acknowledgement and investment to ensure healthy environments. an opportunity to better understand the values and qualities that are needed to complement the measured, pragmatic steps of the relevancy roadmap. We need to seize this opportunity to reorganize ourselves in a way that we can expedite making a positive difference to the environment and work together with partners to make our environment and our communities well again. The relevancy roadmap has created the readiness, and the pandemic may be breaking down some of the barriers in a way that our constituencies and our lawmakers will actually demand these changes from our organizations. Success will require that we harness our collective knowledge and be disciplined in achieving our goals. Scientists warned that the pandemic was inevitable. Globally, we were not prepared, and actions were not taken swiftly enough to contain outbreaks throughout the world. Let's not make the same mistake in our efforts to conserve biodiversity and mitigate and adapt to climate change. Fish and wildlife agencies are uniquely positioned and can play a leadership role in our shift to a new normal and create a future where climate change is not a looming threat and biodiversity is thriving. Undoubtedly, it will take courage to confront difficult conversations and situations and challenges. We'll need to do this with self-awareness and empathy. Transparency and clear communication will help bring us to a future where there is recognition that healthy societies are deeply connected to nature, and only then will our economies thrive and future generations prosper. We will need to continue, and we will need to build and to sustain the momentum. Thank you very much.
Elizabeth Maruma. Elizabeth is the director of the Law Division and has worked with United Nations Environment Program for over 2 decades. Prior to joining the Law Division in June 2014, she was the Deputy Director of the Ecosystems Division, in charge of coordination, operations, and program delivery. For 1 year, she also served as Acting Director of the same division. She ensured effective conservation of migratory animals globally through implementing agreements that cover geographical areas where animals, birds, or marine species migrate during their lifetime. Elizabeth's work at UNEP has focused on the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws at national, regional, and international levels.
Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to join you today. The theme of our discussion today is very timely. The COVID-19 pandemic has clearly demonstrated the importance of protecting nature, not only for its own sake, but for our own well-being. But the pandemic has also shown us how important social relations and culture are in shaping our behavior, including our conservation behavior. With your network of national and subnational US and Canadian agencies in charge of fisheries and wildlife management, together with NGOs and technical agencies affiliated with you, the importance and capacity of your association is both obvious and tremendous. As you may know, the Convention on Biological Diversity has a strong focus on land and seascapes management, connection between ecosystems, and the management of natural resources, including fish and wildlife. Both your association and our convention are multilateral. And your association Principle 5 clearly says that wildlife is an international resource. Your association is a source of very valuable information for all Convention of Biological Diversity parties and vice versa. There are approximately 50,000 subnational governments around the world, and they are actively contributing, many through the Edinburgh process led by the Government of Scotland with the support of the Government of UK and the European Union. Your association could also contribute through the active outreach and engagement to raise awareness on the goals and targets of our convention and how they contribute to bending the curve of biodiversity loss at local and subnational levels. Public engagement and support are key in this, the UN Decade for Action. Fish and wildlife management is very relevant to key CBD topics such as the ecosystems restoration, urban and rural linkages, and other economic transition linked to urbanization, mainstreaming, and health. It is also very relevant to its work program on Article 8J and the role of indigenous peoples and local communities, including the customary sustainable use of biodiversity. I wish to point out that the collaborative partnership on forest provided inputs into the first meeting of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework held in Nairobi, Kenya, August 2019. The working group advanced preparations for the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Its aim was to facilitate the exchange of information on sustainable wildlife management and help to inform the collaborative partnership on sustainable wildlife management in response to the development of the framework and the role of the sustainable wildlife management. The partnership also helped to consolidate views from participating organizations on how best to integrate wildlife-related aspects in developing a new framework. The upcoming post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will incorporate and reflect these considerations by promoting the mainstreaming of biodiversity into economic sectors and mobilization of adequate financial resources. It is a key international tool for the coming decade, not just to advance on biodiversity, but to implement the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as a whole, and as a crucial component of the post-COVID-19 Building Back Better strategies. A revised version of the post-2020 framework's zero draft will be published shortly, and its monitoring framework is slated to be discussed at the upcoming meeting of the Convention's subsidiary bodies. Additionally, in the post-2020 framework, indigenous peoples and local communities are considered as key partners in the implementation of the Convention, and as you may be aware, their role in wildlife management is crucial. Let me take a few moments to speak about the linkages between the pandemic and the biodiversity policies in the context of the strengthened One Health approach. There is mounting evidence that the risk of zoonotic diseases increases due to land use change in biodiversity-rich areas. For instance, tropical forest ages and the increased human and wildlife interaction are a major launching pad for the novel human viruses. The clear link between deforestation and virus emergencies suggests that investments in this area will have a large return. According to recent calculations, global investments into the effective prevention of deforestation and achieving sustainable wildlife trade as a preventive measure to reduce the spread of zoonotic diseases would cost around $20 to $30 billion annually, a tiny fraction of the $1 trillion lost due to the current pandemic policy responses. More generally, recent economic analysis undertaken by major partners of the Convention, World Wildlife Fund, World Bank, and the World Economic Forum provide a strong evidence that the net benefits in human and natural well-being could be significant if ambitious conservation efforts are taken over the next few decades. This could include annual business opportunities worth $10 trillion and the creation of up to 400 million jobs by 2030. Conversely, the continued loss of nature and its ecosystem services under the business as usual scenario will lead to a global economic cost of almost $10 trillion in discounted terms over a period of 2011 to 2050, or $500 billion annually. The upcoming post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will incorporate and reflect these considerations by promoting the mainstreaming of biodiversity into economic sectors and the mobilization of adequate resources. It will be a key international tool into the coming decades, not just to advance on biodiversity, but to implement 2030 agenda as a whole, and as a crucial component of strategies to build back better. There are clear linkages between pandemic prevention and sustainable wildlife management and trade, including for indigenous peoples and local communities. Strengthened biodiversity policies as part of a global pandemic prevention strategies will have important implications for the design and implementation of sustainable wildlife management and trade that is pro-poor and leaves no one behind, and is undertaken with the involvement and consent of indigenous peoples and local communities. Our convention has a long-standing work program of engaging indigenous peoples and local communities as partner in its work, which can be usefully harnessed to this effect. In 2018, the Convention on Biological Diversity welcomed voluntary guidance for a sustainable wild meat sector. While it does not apply to all parties, its aim is to promote the sustainability of supply at source, managing the demand along the entire value chain, and creating enabling conditions for legal, sustainable management of terrestrial wild meat in tropical and subtropical habitats, while taking into account the traditional use by indigenous peoples and local communities to safeguard their livelihoods without adversely affecting them. The voluntary guidelines for the sustainable wild meat sector also works to enhance policy coherence across biodiversity-related conventions and other conservation agreements. Other bodies and entities are encouraged to use the guidance when developing, revising, and implementing governance approaches on wildlife, and when developing and updating national development policies and national biodiversity strategies and action plans. The parties also agreed to undertake cross-sectorial dialogues and joint trainings on sustainable wildlife management among relevant sectors, including forestry, agriculture, veterinary and public health, natural resources, legal and private sector. Also include other sectors like finance, rural development, education, food processing and trade, as well as indigenous peoples and local communities and other relevant stakeholders. All these need to promote the application of the voluntary guidance for a sustainable wild meat sector in accordance with national circumstances. At the 14th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, identification of areas that may require complementary guidance were requested to be developed, in addition to exploring ways to apply such guidance to other geographical areas, other species, and other uses. This is in view of the fact that voluntary guidance for a sustainable wild meat sector is applicable only to some areas of terrestrial, tropical, and subtropical habitats, biomes, and ecosystems. This creates, therefore, opportunities to work with your association and collaborative partnership on wildlife management members in the lead up to our next year's Conference of the Parties 15th. Ladies and gentlemen, let me close with some final observations on COVID-19, biodiversity, and the Convention on Biological Diversity. At no time in modern history have the intimate ties between people and our natural world been more apparent than they are today. the world has been brought to a standstill by the seemingly invisible threat of COVID-19. But this pandemic has also forced us to confront an undeniable reality: the overwhelming impact of our heavy imprint on the natural world has fundamentally altered the conditions in which disease emerge, co-evolve, and spread. It has increased the risks of spillover from wildlife to livestock and from animals to people. We can ill afford to overlook nature's essential contributions to people. Biodiversity provides healthy and sustainable diets, clean air, fresh water, and medicines, among other benefits. Nature is the foundation of equitable and resilient health systems, economies, and societies. Therefore, changes in the capacity of nature to deliver these benefits will impact food security, nutrition, livelihood, income, and health. The governance of our natural systems is critical to advance multiple agendas for human well-being, security, and development. Healthy ecosystems, such as forests, wetlands, grasslands, and marine areas, perform an essential and protective role in regulating our planet's changing climate. They help shield us from floods, droughts, and disasters. Crucially, they also provide essential services such as pollination and healthy soils and natural barriers against pests and diseases. The degradation of nature have direct and sometimes far-reaching health consequences. When we erode the protective shield of nature through deforestation, agricultural production and expansion, logging, mining, cattle ranching, and illegal wildlife trade, we also leave ourselves vulnerable to risks. Over the last 6 months, we have witnessed how vital and fragile our food systems really are, and the extent to which nature's protective shield has been shaken by our unsustainable production, consumption, and trade practices. Moving forward, we must create more equitable and resilient food systems, learn from indigenous peoples and local communities rooted in cultural and traditional knowledge, and recognize the essential role biodiversity plays. We need a green recovery that can promote diverse and locally sourced foods, provide for food security and safety measures, and support local economies that promote the customary sustainable use of biodiversity and traditional diverse diets, as opposed to widespread commercial and unsustainable overconsumption of wildlife. Multi-stakeholder collaboration and partnerships have never been more important to advance integrated solutions for nature and people. This extraordinary moment in history reveals how inclusive and equitable solutions are needed throughout all aspects of the COVID-19 crisis, from immediate response to preparedness and prevention, and the eventual long-term sustainable economic recovery. It is in this context of this pandemic and our ongoing mission to conserve and restore our natural heritage and ecosystems that we must actively collaborate and show our determination to advance robust multi-partner solutions to reach the CBD vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. Thank you.